All right, class, today we're going to talk about making bias strips and bias tape and piping. The first thing you have to be able to do is to create bias strips. Now, you know from construction 1 that we have our straight of grain with fabric and our cross grain, and the bias is anything that's not on those two axes. Typically when we say bias, that we mean a 45-degree angle. Now, hopefully you all know what that is, but just a little refresher. If you look at a corner, that's a 90-degree angle. Halfway through that is a 45-degree angle. So the first step in creating bias is to make bias strips. What I've got is our piece of muslin laid out on what's called a cutting mat. This is a surface that is safe to use something like a rotary cutter on. This is, for all intents and purposes, a pizza cutter for fabric. You don't ever want to use this on my regular tables. Always have to have a cutting mat for a rotary cutter or X-Acto blade cutting or anything like that. We don't want to scar up the table surface, so we use something like a cutting mat. You can also use scissors to cut bias strips, but I'll show you this method and it'll show you why a rotary cutter is so much faster for this. But to get started, you got to make your first marks of where your bias should start to get this 45-degree angle. So to start things out, I'm going to lay my ruler here and I'm going to make a little mark right here at the corner. Now, if you think about 45-degree angles and 90-degree angles, this is a 90-degree angle. 45-degree angles go right across the middle of a square. So if my first mark is here at this point, and this is a 2-inch wide ruler, 1 inch, 2 inch, to get a 45-degree angle, I want to go right across a square. So 2 inches across, 2 inches up. This is our square that we're dealing with. This mark right here is 45-degree angle away from this mark. If I use my ruler to connect those two lines, I am drawing a 45-degree angle on this fabric. Just like that. There's a line at 45 degrees. Now, you can sit here and measure this out time and time again and draw a line and get your scissors and cut it. But here's where it's fast to use a rotary cutter. I'm going to draw that line just so you can see the process of drawing lines. If you want to do this way when you're making bias, you can. However, the quickest way is to use your ruler. You want a straight edge sometimes when you're doing a straight line with a rotary cutter. What I'm going to do is lay this here and use it as a guide for the edge of my blade. When you're rotary cutting, you have to make sure you're holding your guide still if you're using one. See how that just cut a nice little line? And then, since I know my ruler is 2 inches wide, I can come over here and make another cut. Now, this is a little janky because I'm left-handed and using a left-handed tool, but the principle still applies. I don't actually have to have that line to make my 2-inch cut. There's that. Now I'm going to cut a bunch of bias and move on to the next section. I reoriented my fabric so you could see this process at work. Being left-handed is so inconvenient sometimes. So literally, now that I know I have my 45-degree angle, I can just cut 2-inch wide strips using this ruler and this tool. I don't have to draw a single line on here. Again, you want to make sure you're holding your ruler still. But you just move that edge over every time. Don't let your fabric run away from you. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a very simple method for cutting out bias strips. Now, if you need a strip that's more than 2 inches wide, you use a wider straight edge or a wider ruler for that process. If you don't have a ruler that's as wide as you need, then you will have to draw lines and cut them. All right.